What happens when a woman with nothing dares to defy a man who has everything? In the rigid world of Victorian England, a housemaid's voice is supposed to be silent, her opinions invisible. But when Matilda Hayes, a lowly servant, speaks out of turn to save a man's life, she doesn't just break the rules. She shatters the icy fortress around the most powerful and feared man in London, the Duke of Ashington. He was a man who demanded obedience. But her defiance was the one thing he couldn't resist. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a single act of courage rewrote their destinies. Ashington Hall was not a home. It was a fortress of aristocratic frost. Its owner, Alastair, the Duke of Ashington, ruled it with the same cold precision he applied to his vast financial empire. At 32, he was known in London society as the Iron Duke, a man whose tailoring from Savile Row was as immaculate as his reputation was untouchable. He was devastatingly handsome, impossibly wealthy, and utterly devoid of warmth. The staff at Ashington Hall moved on whispers and fear. They understood the cardinal rule. The Duke was not to be troubled, spoken to, or looked at directly. His world was one of ledgers, silent dinners, and absolute, unquestioned authority. Into this frigid world stepped Matilda Tilly Hayes. Tilly was small, quiet, and possessed a face that was easy to overlook, which was, for a housemaid, a professional asset. But beneath her plain grey uniform and starched white cap beat the heart of a lion, and behind her observant eyes lay a mind sharpened by a life she had lost. Her father, a village schoolmaster, had taught her mathematics, literature, and, most dangerously, morality, before debt and sickness claimed him, forcing Tilly into service. She had been at Ashington Hall for 3 months, long enough to learn the map of the corridors and the geography of the Duke's temper. She had never spoken a word in his presence, until the Tuesday of the Long Knives. The Duke was conducting one of his infamous household inspections, a terrifying affair where he moved from room to room, his gaze missing nothing. He was followed by the housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, who held a notepad with a trembling hand. They entered the main drawing room, where Tilly and 2 other maids were polishing silver. The Duke's eyes scanned the room and settled on the hearth, where Mr. Grimshaw, the head butler, was meticulously arranging the firewood. Grimshaw had served the Ashington family for 45 years. He was a man of profound dignity, whose wife had passed away only the month before. The Duke stopped. He pointed a leather-gloved finger, not at the wood, but at the mantelpiece. "What?" he said, his voice a low, cold vibration. "Is that?" Mr. Grimshaw froze. Mrs. Croft squinted. On the marble, tucked behind a French porcelain clock, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It is my locket, Your Grace," Grimshaw whispered, his face pale. "My late wife, Mary. She—" "You are aware," the Duke interrupted, his voice slicing through the butler's grief, "of my policy regarding personal effects in the state-rooms. It is clutter. It is unprofessional. It is a sign of sentiment. And sentiment is a flaw. Your Grace, I merely set it down. I was polishing it. I meant to." "You meant to defy me," the Duke stated. It was not an accusation. It was a verdict. He turned to Mrs. Croft. "Mr. Grimshaw has become sloppy. His sentimentality compromises his duties. Pay him his wages and see him off the grounds by luncheon. He is dismissed." The room stopped breathing. 45 years of service, erased. For a locket! Mr. Grimshaw visibly crumpled, his hand flying to his chest as if to ward off a physical blow. Mrs. Croft's pen shook so violently she could not write. Tilly looked at the old man, his face ashen, his entire life's work undone by a moment of grief. She saw her own father in him, A good man broken by a system that had no mercy, and something inside her snapped. No. The word was quiet, but it echoed in the vast, silent room like a cannon shot. The Duke, who had already turned to leave, stopped. He turned back, his head tilting with a slow, dangerous curiosity. The other maids looked at Tilly with sheer terror. "What?" the Duke said. "Did you say?" Tilly's heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break them. She knew the cost. Dismissal, a ruined reference, poverty. But she looked not at the Duke, but at Mr. Grimshaw's desperate, pleading eyes. She straightened her spine, and, for the first time, met the Duke of Ashington's gaze. His eyes were the colour of a winter storm, and just as cold. "I said no, Your Grace," she said, her voice clearer now, though it trembled. "You must not." Mrs. Croft let out a choked gasp. "You must not," the Duke repeated, stepping toward her. He was a tall man, and he loomed over her. "You are a housemaid. You will address me as Your Grace, and you will not, ever, presume to tell me what I must not do." "Forgive me, Your Grace," Tilly said, her mind racing. "But what you see as a flaw, another might see as fidelity. Mr. Grimshaw has served this house for nearly half a century. He served your father. The locket. It was not defiance. It was memory. It was grief." She took a short breath, plunging ahead. "To dismiss a man for loving his wife, it is not efficient, Your Grace. It is cruel. And this house deserves better than cruelty." Silence. Dead. Absolute silence. Mrs. Croft looked as though she might faint. The Duke's face was an unreadable mask of marble. He stared at Tilly, his stormy eyes searching hers, looking for a trace of fear, or madness, or insolence. He found only conviction. No one had ever spoken to him this way. Not his society equals, not his business partners, and certainly not a servant girl who likely didn't own a second pair of shoes. He should have had her thrown into the street. He should have ruined her. But the most terrifying, most inexplicable thing happened. Alistair, the Iron Duke of Ashington, found himself intrigued. He held her gaze for a full minute, an entire lifetime of social order hanging in the balance. Then he spoke. "The locket," he said to Mr. Grimshaw, his voice clipped, "will be kept in your pocket, not on my mantelpiece. Do not make me speak of it again." He turned to Mrs. Croft. "Mr. Grimshaw will resume his duties." Without another glance at Tilly, he swept from the room. Mr. Grimshaw sagged against the wall, weeping with relief. The other maids stared at Tilly as if she had just grown wings and a halo. Tilly herself finally let out the breath she had been holding, her knees weak. She had defied the Duke. And for a reason she could not possibly understand, she was still standing. But she had done something far more dangerous than save a man's job. She had made the Iron Duke notice her. The aftermath of Tilly's defiance was not immediate. For a week, nothing changed. She was not punished, but she was not acknowledged. She felt the Duke's eyes on her, though. When she was dusting the hall, she would feel a presence, and look up to see him on the landing, staring at her, his expression unreadable, before turning away. The staff, however, treated her with a new, terrified reverence. Mr. Grimshaw, in particular, would bow to her with a gratitude that pained her. "You have a soul, Miss Hayes," he'd whispered to her. "Be careful he doesn't try to take it." Then the summons came. "His Grace wishes to see you in the library," Mrs. Croft announced, her face tight with worry. Tilly entered the vast two-story room, which smelled of old leather and beeswax. The Duke was not reading. He was standing by the fireplace, holding a single sheet of paper. "Miss Hayes," he said, not looking at her. You read and write. It wasn't a question. Yes, Your Grace. My father was a schoolmaster. He taught you sums as well? He did, Your Grace. Arithmetic and some basic bookkeeping. The Duke turned. Mrs. Croft informs me you are diligent. I find that hard to believe. Diligent women are rarely so impulsive. My actions were not an impulse, Your Grace. They were a calculation. I weighed the cost of my silence against the cost of Mr. Grimshaw's life, and found my silence to be the heavier burden. A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his features. A philosophical housemaid. How novel. My current secretary is an idiot. His ledgers are a mess. I require someone to cross-reference his entries with my private accounts. The work is tedious and requires absolute discretion. He was offering her a job, not a promotion, but a test, a transfer from the physical labor of the house to the mental labor of his inner sanctum. I can be discreet, Your Grace, she said. We shall see, he replied. You will report to the study tomorrow at 8. You will speak of what you see to no one. If you do, you will find that Mr. Grimshaw's fate will seem a kindness compared to yours. The next day, Tilly's life changed. She was given a new dress, a dark, simple secretary's uniform, and a small desk in the corner of the Duke's massive study. Her hands, raw from lye soap, were now stained with ink, and she saw the real Duke of Ashington. He was not just a cold aristocrat, he was a machine. He worked from dawn until long after she was dismissed at dusk. He managed shipping lines, coal mines, and properties across London. He was brilliant, ruthless, and, she soon realized, under a tremendous, invisible pressure. But her new proximity also brought a new danger. It was not the Duke, but his intended. Lady Beatrice Vane. Lady Beatrice was everything Tilly was not, breathtakingly beautiful, with hair the colour of spun gold and a lineage as old as the Duke's. Their engagement was the talk of the ton. It was an alliance of two great fortunes, a merger of empires. Beatrice visited the hall often, and she despised the staff. She particularly despised Tilly. She had heard the whispers of the housemaid who had talked back to the Duke, and she saw the girl's presence in his private study as a stain. "Alistair, darling, must you keep the help in here?" Beatrice drawled one afternoon, wafting in on a cloud of expensive French perfume. "It smells of soap." "Miss Hayes is assisting me with the quarterly accounts," Alistair replied, not looking up from his desk. Beatrice's sharp blue eyes landed on Tilly. "Is she? How clever she must be." She drifted over to Tilly's desk and picked up a ledger. "All these little numbers. It must be so taxing for your simple mind. Do try not to make any catastrophic errors. Alistair hates mistakes." "I do my best, Lady Beatrice," Tilly said, her voice even. "I'm sure you do." Beatrice smiled, a tight, cold expression. But a creature, no matter how well trained, will always revert to its nature. The warning was clear. A few days later, the trap was sprung. The Duke was in London, attending a meeting at Lloyd's Bank. Lady Beatrice was in the drawing room, supposedly waiting for him. She called for tea. Tilly, being in the study, was the closest and was sent by Mrs. Croft to deliver it. Tilly entered the room, balancing the heavy silver tray. Beatrice was standing by the window. "Just set it down, girl," she ordered. As Tilly bent to place the tray on the low table, Lady Beatrice let out a piercing shriek. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest, and the teapot wobbled. Hot tea sloshed over the side, scalding Tilly's hand. Tilly hissed in pain but held the tray steady. "You clumsy oaf!" Beatrice screamed, just as the Duke entered the room, drawn by the noise. "What is the meaning of this?" Alistair demanded. "Alistair, Thank God, this creature, she tried to assault me. She threw the tea at me." Beatrice pointed a trembling finger at Tilly. "Look, it's all over the carpet." The Duke looked at the floor, where a small puddle was spreading. He looked at Beatrice, who was artfully dishevelled. Then he looked at Tilly, who was standing ramrod straight, her face pale with shock, her right hand bright red from the scalding tea. "Miss Hayes," the Duke said. Tilly's mind was clear. It was her word against a lady's. She was doomed. "Lady Beatrice stumbled, Your Grace," Tilly said calmly. "I caught the tray before it fell. My hand was burned, but none of the tea touched her." "She's lying," Beatrice cried. "She has hated me from the start. She wants you for herself, Alistair. She's a scheming, ambitious nothing. Have her dismissed. Have her arrested." Alistair's face was stone. He walked forward, past his furious fiancée, and stopped directly in front of Tilly. He did not look at her face. He looked at her hand, which she was clutching to her stomach. "Show me," he commanded. Tilly reluctantly held out her hand. A blistering red mark was already rising on her skin. The Duke looked at it. Then he looked at Beatrice. His eyes were flat. "There is no tea on your gown, Beatrice," he said. I jumped back. It just missed me. You claim she threw it, yet the scald is on the back of her hand, consistent with her gripping a tray that was tilted away from you. The spill is at her feet, not yours." Beatrice's face went white. Alistair turned to Tilly. "Go to the kitchen. Have Mrs. Croft tend to that burn. Then return to the study. We have work to do." "Yes, Your Grace." Tilly curtsied, her heart pounding, and fled the room. She had been defended. He had believed her. She didn't see the look that passed between the Duke and his fiancée. Beatrice, for the first time in her life, looked afraid. The Duke's voice, when he finally spoke to her, was not loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. "You will never," he said, "lie to me again, and you will not touch my staff. Am I clear?" Lady Beatrice, sensing a crack in the foundation of her future, could only nod. The Iron Duke had defended a housemaid, and in doing so, he had drawn a battle line she had no intention of honouring. Tilly's hand healed, but the atmosphere in the house grew thick with unspoken tension. Lady Beatrice was scarce, and the Duke was more consumed by his work than ever. He was short-tempered, restless, and would often stare into the fireplace for an hour at a time, lost in a storm of thought. His trust in Tilly, however, had solidified. He began giving her more complex tasks. She was no longer just cross-referencing. She was drafting his letters, summarizing reports from his mine managers, and balancing the household accounts. It was in the household accounts that she found the first thread. The Duke, for all his wealth, was spending astronomical sums. The bills for wine, for silks, for parties he rarely attended, were staggering. But strangest of all were the payments to his solicitor, Mr. Miles Davies, and regular, massive transfers to an entity called the Vane Consortium. Tilly knew Vane was Lady Beatrice's family name. It seemed odd that he would be paying his future father-in-law. One evening, the Duke was called away to London on urgent business. He left Tilly with a mountain of paperwork. "Organise this," he'd ordered. "I want a summary of all expenditures over £500 for the last quarter." She worked late into the night, the only sound the scratching of her pen. In the back of the Duke's bottom desk drawer, she found a ledger she had never seen before. It was bound not in the standard green or black, but in dark red leather. It was not locked. She knew she shouldn't open it. This was not part of her duties. This was his private world. But the name Vane Consortium burned in her mind. She opened it. It was not a ledger of accounts. It was a journal of his father's, and now his, most private financial dealings. And the truth, written in the Duke's precise, angry script, laid her flat. The Ashington estate was bleeding. The old Duke, his father, had been a trusting man. He had entered into a partnership with Lord Vane, Beatrice's father, and their solicitor, Mr. Davies, to invest in overseas ventures. Tilly saw the names: the Argentine Rail Consortium, the South African Diamond Scheme. Ventures her own father had read about in the papers, calling them glorified bubbles. They were bubbles, and they had burst. The old Duke had died, leaving his son a mountain of secret debt, all of it owed to Lord Vane or held by the solicitor. Mr. Davies, the family lawyer for decades, had been systematically draining the estate, funneling money to Vane. The Iron Duke was not cold. He was drowning. And the marriage— oh God, the marriage. It wasn't a merger of fortunes. It was a sacrifice. Alistair was being blackmailed. He was marrying Lady Beatrice, a woman he clearly despised, to stop her father and Davies from calling in the debts and revealing the Ashington name was bankrupt. He was trading his life to save his family's honour. Tilly felt sick. The man she saw as an unfeeling tyrant was, in fact, a prisoner. His coldness was a shield. His cruelty to Mr. Grimshaw was the lashing out of a man trapped in a cage. Suddenly, a new entry caught her eye. It was from the week before. Vane is pushing up the wedding. He grows nervous. Davies reports the little housemaid is too clever. She's in the ledgers. She must be dealt with. He suggests a simple theft. Plant the Vane diamonds on her. I refused. I will not have an innocent ruined. A cold dread washed over Tilly. They weren't just blackmailing him. They were afraid of her. And the Duke, he had protected her. The next line was even more chilling. I cannot find a way out. The proof I need of their collusion is missing. My father's private correspondence. Davies claims it was lost in a fire. Without it, it is my word against theirs. I am trapped. I must marry her. God help me. Tilly's mind flashed back. A fire. She remembered Mr. Grimshaw, the butler, talking about a small fire in the old Duke's study just before he died. He'd said it was a miracle nothing important was lost, just a box of old hunting letters. She closed the red ledger, her hands shaking. The Duke was wrong. The proof wasn't lost. She knew exactly where it was. She hurried from the study, her heart a drum of war. She found Mr. Grimshaw in the butler's pantry, polishing silver. "Mr. Grimshaw," she said, her voice low and urgent, "you must trust me. Do you remember the fire in the old Duke's study last year?" He looked up, surprised. "Aye, Miss Hayes, a terrible fright. A log fell from the grate, burned a box of the master's old letters." "What happened to the box?" "Why, it was ruined, charred to nothing. I swept up the ash myself." "But the box? It was one of those metal deed boxes. It was scorched black, but it held. And the contents, the letters." Grimshaw frowned, thinking. "The edges were burned. Aye. Mrs. Croft said to burn the lot, but I couldn't. It felt wrong. It was the old Duke's hand. I packed what was left. I put the box in the old cellar archives. Down with the unfiled deeds." "Why, Miss Hayes?" "Mr. Grimshaw," Tilly said, gripping his arm, "you didn't just save your own job. I think you might have just saved the Duke." Tilly knew she had no time. The Duke was in London, but Lord Vane and Lady Beatrice were expected at the hall that afternoon to finalise the wedding contracts. Davies, the solicitor, would be with them. They were coming for the final signature, the one that would seal Alistair's fate. With Mr. Grimshaw as her guide, Tilly descended into the damp, cold cellar archives. It was a room of forgotten history, piled high with trunks and tin boxes. After 20 minutes of frantic searching, Grimshaw pointed. There. It was a black, scorched deed box. The lock had been warped by the heat. Tilly used a fireplace poker from a nearby room to pry the lid open. Inside was a pile of scorched, water-damaged letters. Most were illegible. But as Tilly carefully sifted through them, her fingers trembling, she found one. And then another. They were letters not about hunting, but about transfers, percentages, and profit-sharing. Explicit correspondence between the old Duke, Lord Vane, and Mr. Davies, detailing the Argentine scheme. And at the bottom, a signed memorandum, overlooked by the solicitor in his haste, explicitly stating that Lord Vane and Davies were equal partners in the venture, and that all initial capital from Ashington was to be considered a loan, not a shared risk. They hadn't just encouraged a bad investment, they had stolen the money and disguised it as a loss. It was proof. It was fraud. "I must get this to the Duke," Tilly whispered. "He is in London, miss," Grimshaw said. "He is not due back until tomorrow." "He will come back tonight," Tilly said, her resolve hardening. "Go to the stables. Have his fastest horse saddled and ready for a messenger. I will write the most important letter of my life." She ran back to the study, the precious letters clutched to her chest. She sat at the Duke's desk, her mind clear. "Your Grace, do not sign the contracts. I have found the proof. Davies and Vane committed fraud. I have your father's letters. They are in my possession. Return to Ashington Hall tonight. Delay them. I am your obedient servant, Monsieur Hayes." She sealed it and gave it to the stable boy Grimshaw had waiting. "Ride as if the devil is at your heels," she ordered. She had just hidden the scorched letters inside the red leather ledger in the Duke's desk when she heard the crunch of carriage wheels. They were early. Lady Beatrice, Lord Vane, and Mr. Davies swept into the great hall. They were in a celebratory mood. "Where is Alistair?" Beatrice demanded. "His Grace was delayed in London," Mrs. Croft said. "He is expected this evening." "This evening?" Lord Vane, a large man with a florid face, boomed. "Nonsense! We are here to sign. He knew the time." "He will be here," Tilly said, stepping out from the study. The three conspirators turned to her. Davies, a thin, rat-like man, narrowed his eyes. "And who are you?" "This is the secretary I told you about, Father," Beatrice sneered. "The little mouse." "I am Miss Hayes," Tilly said, her chin high. "His Grace left instructions. You are to be made comfortable in the drawing-room. He will join you as soon as he arrives." She was bluffing. She was stalling. She just needed time. But Beatrice was no fool. She saw the ink on Tilly's fingers, the high colour in her cheeks. She sensed that something was wrong. "You were in his study," Beatrice said, her voice soft and dangerous. "Writing letters, were we?" "I was finishing His Grace's correspondence," Tilly replied. "I think not." Beatrice's eyes flashed. "Father, Davies, I believe this little rat has been in the pantry. She has been sniffing around places she doesn't belong." Beatrice walked toward the study. Tilly moved to block her path. "Lady Beatrice, the Duke forbids anyone from entering his study." "And you are the guard dog?" Beatrice laughed. She shoved Tilly hard, sending her stumbling back. "Search her." "What? You can't!" Tilly cried, as Lord Vane grabbed her arms. "This is assault!" Tilly struggled. "It is a citizen's arrest, girl," Davies snapped, his voice high. "We have reason to believe you are a thief." "What are you talking about?" Beatrice smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. She reached into her own handbag and pulled out a glittering diamond and emerald necklace. It was a famous piece, one Tilly had seen in portraits. The vain emeralds. "My necklace," Beatrice said. "It went missing from my carriage, and you were the only one who approached us." "That's absurd. Father, hold her!" Beatrice walked up to Tilly, the necklace in her hand. "You want to be so close to the Duke? You want his power? Let's see how you look in my jewels." With a sudden, vicious movement, Beatrice shoved the necklace down the front of Tilly's simple dress. "There!" she screamed, for the benefit of the servants who were beginning to gather. "She has it! The thief! She has the Vane emeralds! Seize her!" Lord Vane threw Tilly to the floor. Mr. Davies grabbed the necklace from her bodice and held it aloft. "She is a common thief. We'll have the magistrate here in an hour. She'll hang for this." Tilly, on the cold marble floor, felt the trap close. The Duke wasn't here. Her letter hadn't reached him. They had her. They would claim she stole the necklace, and in the ensuing search of the study, they would find the scorched letters and destroy them. They had won. "She is no thief." The voice that spoke was like a crack of thunder. Tilly looked up. There in the doorway, mud-splattered from a hard ride, his face a mask of terrifying fury, stood Alistair, the Duke of Ashington. He had gotten her message. The Duke strode into the hall, his riding crop still in his hand. He didn't look at Tilly on the floor. His eyes were locked on the three figures frozen in their tableau of false accusation. "Your Grace," Davies stammered, pocketing the necklace. "Thank heavens you've arrived. We've just caught this viper, in the act of thievery. She stole Lady Beatrice's necklace." "She did," Lord Vane blustered, stepping away from Tilly. "A blatant, shocking crime." The Duke slowly pulled off his gloves. "Did she?" "Alistair, she is a menace," Beatrice cried, resuming her role as victim. "She must be arrested." "I agree," Alistair said, his voice deadly quiet. "An arrest should be made." He walked past them and stood over Tilly, who was still on the floor, breathless. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Get up, Miss Hayes," he commanded. Tilly rose, her legs trembling. He turned her to face him, his back to the conspirators. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, met hers. He was looking for one thing: the truth. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "I have it." It was all he needed. He turned back to the trio. "Mr. Davies, you are my solicitor. You, of all people, know the value of evidence. Tell me, how did Miss Hayes steal this necklace?" She approached the carriage. She must have taken it then," Davies said. "And yet," the Duke continued, "Miss Hayes has not left this house all day. I, however, have. I rode past your carriage on the London road 2 hours ago. It was stopped. You, Lord Vane, were arguing with your driver, but Lady Beatrice was not in the carriage. She was walking by the road. I saw her." Beatrice's face paled. "And I saw," the Duke said, "that necklace in her hand. She was not wearing it. She was holding it, preparing it." "This is slander," Lord Vane roared. "Is it?" The Duke smiled, a terrifying, humourless expression. "Miss Hayes sent me a message, an urgent one. It seems she found some old correspondence." Davies's composure shattered. His rat-like face twitched. "Old correspondence. Meaningless. Old papers." "Not to me," the Duke said, "and not, I imagine, to the Crown Prosecutor. Miss Hayes, would you be so kind as to retrieve the red ledger from my desk, and the scorched items you filed within it?" Tilly: "Of course, Your Grace." As Tilly walked to the study, Davies made a strangled noise. "Your Grace, this is a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Alistair said, "is that you believed I was my father. He was a good man, a trusting man. I am not." Tilly returned, holding the red ledger. She handed it to the Duke. He opened it and produced the scorched, damning letters. He held up the memorandum. My father's loan, your signatures, and a very clear schedule of repayment that, I see, you replaced with a fraudulent schedule of losses. This is not a debt, Lord Vane. This is conspiracy. This is fraud. This, he said, looking at Davies, is disbarment and prison. And this, he said, looking at Beatrice, is ruin. Lord Vane collapsed into a chair, his face purple. You can't prove it. Those papers are... They are enough, Alistair said. Enough to open an inquiry. Enough to have Lloyd's Bank freeze your assets by morning. Enough to have the Vane name dragged through every gossip column and criminal court in London. Beatrice, however, was a fighter. Do it, she hissed, her beauty curdling into a mask of pure hatred. Do it, and I will still ruin you. I will tell everyone the Iron Duke is bankrupt, that you were so desperate you were marrying me to save your pathetic name. I will destroy you, Alistair. I swear it. The Duke looked at her, and for the first time, Tilly saw something like pity in his eyes. You could have, Beatrice, he said quietly. But you see, while you were planting jewels, I was at my bank. The news of your fraud, it is very valuable. My creditors, upon hearing that my largest debt was, in fact, a criminal asset to be seized and returned, were more than happy to extend my credit. Indefinitely. He was not bankrupt. Not any more. He had been, but the proof of the fraud had saved him. He walked to the bell pull. The engagement is, of course, broken. Mr. Grimshaw, he said, as the butler appeared. Your Grace? Lord Vane is unwell. His daughter and his solicitor will be escorting him home. See that their things are packed. They will not be returning. The three of them, utterly defeated, were escorted out. Davies was weeping. Lord Vane looked as if he'd had a stroke. Beatrice walked past Alistair, her head high. You will regret this, she whispered. I regret, Alistair replied, that I didn't do it sooner. When they were gone, the hall fell silent. It was just the Duke and Tilly. The adrenaline faded, leaving Tilly shaking. Alistair turned to her. He looked at her, not as a master to a servant, but as a man to an equal. He, the great Duke, who had been brought to his knees by lies, had been saved by the courage of a housemaid. You defied me, Miss Hayes, he said, his voice soft. Yes, Your Grace. You went through my private papers. Yes, Your Grace. You risked your life, your reputation, everything, for me. I risked it, Tilly corrected him, finding her strength, for the truth. He studied her face, the exhaustion, the ink smudge on her cheek, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. You are no longer a housemaid, he said. The position of secretary is insufficient. The estate is a disaster. The finances are a tangled mess. I have to rebuild everything. He paused, and what he said next changed the world. I require your assistance, Miss Hayes, as my partner. My chief financial advisor. It was a preposterous title, an impossible role for a woman, let alone a servant. It was, in its own way, a proposal more shocking than marriage. Tilly looked at this complex, cold and brilliant man who was only just learning to be vulnerable. I accept, Your Grace, she said. Alistair, he said. My name is Alistair. The scandal was titanic. The engagement of the Duke of Ashington to Lady Beatrice Vane was not just broken, it was obliterated. Society buzzed with rumours, but the Iron Duke, in a masterful stroke, controlled the narrative. He let it be known that he had discovered financial improprieties in Lord Vane's holdings, and had withdrawn to protect his own good name. The Vane family, facing disgrace and the Duke's threat of prosecution, quietly liquidated their assets and fled to the continent. But inside Ashington Hall, a quiet revolution was underway. Matilda Hayes was given a suite of rooms, a wardrobe of respectable clothes, and a new title, Controller of the Ashington Household. The staff, led by a deeply loyal Mr. Grimshaw, were stunned but accepting. They had seen her courage. They had seen his defense of her. The study became their world. The partnership he had offered was not a title, it was a reality. Tilly, with her schoolmaster's mind for numbers, tore into the ledgers. Alistair, with his innate understanding of power, handled the banks. "You cannot," she told him firmly one morning, "continue to fund the Duke of Rutland's expedition. It's a vanity. You are paying for his hobby." "His family is an important ally in the Lords," Alistair countered, leaning over her desk. "His allyship is costing you £10,000 a quarter. We must liquidate the properties in Kent. They are underproducing and overtaxed. My great-grandfather built that estate. And your great-grandson will lose it if you keep it," she said, her pen hovering over the page. He stared at her, a spark of anger in his eyes, but it quickly faded, replaced by grudging respect. "Very well, Miss Hayes. Liquidate. But we will reinvest in British steel. The railways are expanding north. An excellent choice, Your Grace. Alistair," he corrected her, for the 10th time. "Alistair," she whispered, and the name felt foreign and warm on her tongue. Their days were spent in a battle of wills and wits. Their evenings were spent in quiet companionship. He would read his papers. She would read her books. One night, he found her struggling with a complex investment report. "The yields," she muttered. "They don't align with the principle." He came to stand behind her, his presence a warmth she had grown accustomed to. He leaned over, his sleeve brushing her arm. "You are not accounting for the debenture," he said, his voice low, his breath stirring her hair. "It is secured against the asset itself, not the company. See?" His finger traced the line of figures. She was acutely aware of his closeness, of the clean scent of his soap and the heat radiating from him. She had never been so close to a man. I see," she said, her voice unsteady. He did not move away. "You are remarkable, Matilda." He had never used her full name. She looked up, her neck craning to meet his gaze. His stormy eyes were no longer cold. They were something else. Deep, searching, and vulnerable. "You saved me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not just my fortune. My self." "You saved yourself, Your Grace. I only found the key," she said, flustered. "You were the key," he replied. He slowly straightened, the moment broken. But the air in the room had changed. The ink and paper, the ledgers and laws, they were no longer the only things binding them together. The thaw of the Iron Duke was slow, but it was total. He began to smile, a small, rusty expression at first, usually directed at her exasperated corrections of his impulsive spending. He began to host small dinners, not with the high ton, but with industrialists, architects and thinkers, and at his side, taking notes, was always Miss Hayes. Society was baffled. Who was this plain, quiet woman who sat at the Duke's right hand? This controller, who clearly controlled more than just the household? Alistair did not care. For the first time in his life, he was not performing his duty. He was living his life. He found he did not want to make a single decision, financial, political, or personal, without asking, "What does Miss Hayes think?" He realized with a jolt that was both terrifying and exhilarating that her opinion was the only one that mattered. He respected her mind, he admired her courage, and he was, to his profound shock, falling desperately in love with her. A year bloomed, withered, and bloomed again. The name Ashington, once whispered with concern in the halls of Lloyd's Bank, was now spoken with reverence. The estate was not just solvent, it was a juggernaut. The alliance of Alistair's bold vision and Tilly's meticulous, brilliant mind had proven unstoppable. They had reinvested, divested, and rebuilt. The coal mines in the north, once mismanaged, now turned a quarterly profit that eclipsed the old Duke's yearly income. Ashington Hall itself was transformed. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the hum of purpose. The study remained their sanctuary, but their partnership had outgrown its walls. Alistair, once a recluse, now hosted dinners with engineers, architects, and forward-thinking industrialists. And at his side, never behind him, sat Matilda Hayes. Society, having recovered from the Vane scandal, was utterly baffled. They had accepted Alistair's narrative of financial impropriety, but they could not understand the plain, quiet woman who was his constant shadow. She was introduced as his financial controller, a title so preposterous for a woman that most assumed it was a coded insult. But those who tried to dismiss her found themselves expertly and quietly corrected on matters of finance, politics, and even art. Tilly had found her place. She was respected by the staff, feared by competitors, and, she knew, cherished by Alistair. Their evenings were a comfortable routine of shared work, quiet suppers, and the occasional, charged silence when his hand brushed hers over a ledger, a silence that spoke volumes more than words. She had a life she had never dared to dream of. But one problem remained, a stone in the shoe of their perfect progress. The Duke needed an heir, and with that problem came the Dowager Duchess of Abernathy. Alistair's aunt was a woman built of iron, whalebone, and immovable tradition. She descended upon the hall with a single, non-negotiable purpose: to see her nephew married to a woman of appropriate, immaculate lineage. Alistair, this charade has gone on long enough, she declared at dinner, her sharp eyes flicking to Tilly with unconcealed disdain. You have restored the family name, a commendable feat. Now you must secure it. This person has been a useful tool, I'm sure. She waved a jeweled hand at Tilly. But it is time to put your tools away and acquire a wife. Tilly's blood ran cold. A tool. Aunt, you will speak to Miss Hayes with respect, Alistair stated, his voice clipping. She is the saviour of this house. Oh, fiddlesticks, the Duchess snapped. She is a servant you've allowed to play dress-up. The ton is laughing at you, Alistair. They call her your pet calculator. You must put an end to this. I have a list. The annual Ashington Ball, the first one to be held since the Duke's financial recovery, was to be the hunting ground. The Duchess, seizing control, had invited every eligible, blue-blooded debutante in England. Tilly, though controller of the household, was tasked with overseeing every preparation. It was a unique form of torture. She approved the menus, the floral arrangements, the string quartet, all for a pageant designed to find the woman who would replace her. She felt like an imposter, a ghost polishing the gilded cage she was about to be cast out of. She had rebuilt his empire, but she could not be his Duchess. She was, and always would be, Matilda Hayes, the schoolmaster's daughter. The night of the ball arrived. The hall was a supernova of light. Hundreds of guests, gleaming in silks and jewels from Garrod's, filled the grand ballroom. Tilly stood in the shadows of a velvet-draped alcove, a clipboard in her hand, managing the staff. The dark blue gown she wore, a gift from Alistair, of a cut and fabric she'd once only dreamed of touching, felt like a costume. It set her apart from the servants, but it could not make her one of them. She was a creature of the middle world, belonging nowhere. She watched Alistair enter. He was magnificent in his formal evening wear, the dark coat and white tie emphasizing his height and the cold authority he still commanded. He was the undisputed master of his world. His aunt, triumphant, immediately seized his arm and steered him toward a glittering flock of young ladies. Tilly's heart felt like a leaden weight in her chest. She watched as he danced with Lady Jane, his movements flawless. She watched as he bowed to Lady Catherine, his face a polite, unreadable mask. He was the Iron Duke again, performing his duty. He's just doing what he must, she told herself, a familiar, painful litany. He rebuilt his name. Now he must secure it. I was the scaffolding. The building is complete. The scaffolding must come down. A tear, hot and traitorous, slipped down her cheek. She had been a fool to think this could be her life. She was an assistant, a partner in business, but she could never be a partner in life. She turned to leave, to retreat to the one place she truly belonged, the safety of the study, with its familiar scent of ink and old paper. "Where are you going, Matilda?" His voice, low, urgent, and right behind her. She spun around, wiping her face. "Your Grace," she stammered. "Alistair, I was just checking on the supper service. Mrs. Croft." "You were running," he said, his stormy eyes searching her face. He saw the tear track, the despair she couldn't hide. I do not belong here," she whispered, the truth finally breaking free. "I am not one of them. I am a spectacle, Alistair. Your pet calculator." "Your aunt is right. This has to end. You must do your duty." "I have done my duty," he said, his voice raw with an emotion that stunned her. "I did my duty to my father. I did my duty to my name. For an entire year, I have done my duty to my fortune. Now, I will do my duty to my heart." The music swelled, a grand, sweeping waltz. The Dowager Duchess, sensing her nephew had gone rogue, was bearing down on them, a smug-looking debutante with hair the colour of straw in tow. "Alistair, darling, you simply must meet Lady Elspeth. Her father owns half of—" Alistair raised his hand, a simple, sharp gesture that silenced his formidable aunt. He did not look at her. He did not look at the debutante. He looked only at Tilly, his eyes blazing with an intensity she had never seen. And then he did the most defiant, most shocking, most wonderful thing of his life. In the center of his ancestral ballroom, in front of the assembled and gasping aristocracy of England, the Duke of Ashington bowed. It was not the short, polite nod he gave the other ladies. It was a deep, formal, reverent bow, offered not to a lady, but to his former housemaid. "Matilda Hayes," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly, deathly silent room. "Will you dance with me?" A collective gasp, a whoosh of inhaled air, swept the hall. The orchestra faltered, a violin squeaking in surprise. The Dowager Duchess's face went from puce to a mottled, furious white. Tilly's hand flew to her mouth. This was not just a dance. This was a declaration. This was social war. "They will destroy you," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror and a dawning, brilliant hope. "Alistair, they will ruin you for this." "Let them try," he said, holding out his hand, his gaze locked on hers, a promise of utter, unshakable support. "I have faced ruin before. It holds no fear for me, but a life without you, that I will not countenance." She placed her trembling hand in his. He led her onto the vast, empty expanse of the dance floor. As he wrapped one strong arm around her waist and took her hand, the orchestra, after a stunned, silent beat, began to play. They danced. They were the only two people on the floor. Every eye was on them, 1,000 daggers of judgment, horror, and fascinated disbelief. The whispers were a rising hiss. The housemaid. He's mad. Vane was right. What a scandal. Alistair didn't notice. He saw only her. You defied me, Matilda, in my own drawing room, because you knew what was right, he whispered, his lips near her ear as he spun her in a graceful arc. Now, I will defy them all, for the same reason. Look at me. Only me. When the final chord of the waltz echoed and faded, they stood in the center of the floor, the silence of the room a palpable, crushing weight. Alistair did not release her. He kept her hand in his, raised it to his lips, and kissed it, not her knuckles, but her palm, a gesture of profound intimacy. Then he turned to the stunned, hostile crowd. My lords, my ladies, he announced, his voice ringing with the iron authority they all recognized. You came here tonight to meet the future Duchess of Ashington. My aunt was kind enough to gather you all for the occasion. Allow me to present her. He turned back to Tilly, whose heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. He looked at her, his eyes soft, and he dropped to one knee. The room exploded. The Dowager Duchess let out a small, strangled scream. In front of God and all of high society, the Iron Duke knelt on the polished floor. Matilda Hayes, he said, his voice shaking for the first time, you are the bravest, wisest, and truest person I have ever known. You came to this house with nothing but your courage and your integrity. You faced down my anger, you uncovered a conspiracy, and you saved me from my own prison. You are the only woman I have ever respected. You are the only woman I have ever loved. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and pulled out, not a new ring, but his father's signet ring, the one he wore every day. I do not ask you to fit into this world. I ask you to help me build a new one. Will you do me the profound, undeserved honor of becoming my wife? Tilly looked down at this great, powerful man, kneeling at her feet. She saw the man he had been, cold, broken, and trapped. She saw the man he was now, strong, whole, and free. And she saw the woman she had become, no longer a servant, no longer a tool, but his true and equal partner. The whispers, the judgment, the gaping faces of the ton, they all faded away, until there was only his face, his eyes, waiting for her answer. Yes, she whispered, the tears flowing freely now, but they were tears of joy. Then, louder, for all of them to hear, her voice clear and strong. Yes, Alistair, I will. He rose, his face illuminated by a smile so radiant it stunned the onlookers. He slid the heavy gold ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. The ballroom, for a moment, remained in shocked paralysis. Alistair ignored them all. He cupped her face in his hands. Thank you, he breathed. And he kissed her. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, and with all the pent-up love of a year of quiet glances and shared ledgers. It was a kiss that sealed his final, greatest defiance. The servant who defied the Duke had not just become the woman he loved. She had become his partner, his savior, and, as the gasping crowd now knew, his Duchess. And the Iron Duke, at last, was truly, completely, and incandescently happy. And so, Duchess Matilda of Ashington became one of the most unconventional and powerful women of her time. She never learned the art of the polite insult, but she balanced the finances of half of London. She didn't just break the rules, she rewrote the entire book. Theirs was not a love story that started with a glance, but with an act of courage. It proves that true love isn't about finding someone who fits a perfect mold. It's about finding the one person who has the strength to help you break it. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest defiance is simply a matter of speaking the truth when the whole world demands your silence. Thank you for watching. Did this story touch your heart? Do you believe that love can truly conquer class? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and insights are what make this community so special. And if you enjoyed this journey, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who needs a story of courage, and most importantly, subscribing to our channel for more real-life dramas, just like this one. We'll see you in the next story.